Hello, and thank you for joining me in Annie Stories. Today, I will be reading What the Moon Saw by Hans Christian Andersen. In this tale, a painter recounts a series of unrelated events told to him by the moon. Altogether, there are 33 short stories, or 33 evenings in total. This video will be a reading of the first 12 evenings. So without further ado, let us begin. What the Moon Saw. It is very extraordinary, but when my feelings are most fervent and at their best, my tongue and my hands alike seem tied. I cannot reproduce my impressions either in words or in painting as I feel them burning within me. And yet I am an artist. My eyes tell me so, and all who have seen my sketches and notes acknowledge the same. I am only a poor lad, and I live in one of the narrowest streets, but light is not wanting to me, for I live high up, and I have a fine view over the roof. For the first few days when I came to live in the town, it seemed very cramped and lonely. Instead of green woods and hills, I only had chimney pots on my horizon. I had not a single friend, and there was not even the face of an acquaintance to greet me. One evening, I was standing sadly by the window. I opened it and looked out, and there, how pleased I was! I saw a face I knew, a round, friendly face, my best friend at home. It was the moon, the dear old moon, unchanged, and looking exactly the same as he used to look when he peeped at me through the willows in the marshes. I kissed my hand to him, and he shone straight into my room and promised to look in at me every evening he was out. This promise he had faithfully kept, and it is only a pity that he stays so short a time. Every time he comes, he tells me something or another which he had seen the night before. "Now paint what I tell you," said he, "and you will have a very fine picture book." I have done as he said for many evenings, and in my own way, I could give a new rendering of the 1001 Nights, but that would be too many. Those I give here are not selected, but they come in the order in which I heard them. A highly gifted painter, a poet, or a musician might perhaps make more of them. What I have given here are only hasty sketches, with my own thoughts occasionally interspersed, for the moon did not come every night. There were some evenings when he was hidden by the clouds. First Evening. Last evening, to give the moon's own words, as I was gliding through the clear atmosphere of India and reflecting myself in the Ganges, I tried to pierce the thick groves of plantain trees, the leaves of which overlap each other as tightly as the horny plates on the back of the turtle. From out of the thicket came a Hindu maiden. She was as light as a gazelle, and as beautiful as Eve. There was such an airy grace about her, and yet such firmness of purpose in this daughter of India. I could read her intention in coming. The thorny creepers tore her sandals, but she stepped rapidly onwards. The deer coming up from the river, where they had quenched their thirst, bounded shyly past her, for the girl held in her hand a burning lamp. I could see the blood coursing in her delicate fingers as she bent them round the flame to form a shelter for it. She approached the river and placed the lamp upon the face of the waters, and it floated away on the stream. The flame flickered and seemed as if it would go out, but still it burned, and the dark sparkling eyes of the girl followed it with a longing glance from under the silken fringes. She knew that if the lamp burned as long as she could follow it with her eyes, her lover lived, but if it went out, he was dead. The lamp burnt and flickered, and her heart burnt and trembled. She sank upon her knees in prayer. By her side in the grass lay a venomous snake, but she heeded it not. She only thought of Brahma and her bridegroom. "He lives," she rejoiced, and from the hills came the echo, He lives! Second evening. It was yesterday, the moon told me. I peeped down into a little court surrounded by houses. In it sat a hen with 11 chickens. A charming little girl was skipping about among them. The hen clucked and spread her wings in alarm over her brood. Then the little girl's father came out and scolded her, and I slipped away without thinking any more about it. But tonight, only a few minutes ago, I looked into the same court. At first it was quite quiet, but then the same little girl came out. She crept softly along to the chicken house, lifted the latch, and slipped in beside the hen and chickens. They cackled and flapped their wings, and the little girl ran after them. I saw it all quite plainly, for I peeped in by a hole in the wall. I was quite angry with the naughty child, and felt pleased when her father came and scolded her more angrily than yesterday. He took her by the arm, and she bent back her head, showing her big blue eyes full of tears. "What are you doing here?" asked he. She cried and said, "I only wanted to get into the hen to kiss her and to ask her to forgive me for frightening her yesterday. But I was afraid to tell you." The father kissed the sweet innocent upon the forehead, and I kissed her on the eyes and lips. Third evening. In the narrow street close by, it is so narrow that I can only let my beams glide down for a few minutes, but in those minutes I see enough to know what the people are who move about there. I saw a woman 16 years ago who was a child. Away in the country, she played in the old vicarage garden. The rose hedges were old and past flowering. They were running wild over the paths and sending up long shoots into the apple trees. Here and there grew one poor rose, not lovely as the queen of flowers should be, but the color was there, and the fragrance. The parson's little daughter seemed to me a far sweeter flower, sitting upon her footstool under the wild hedge, kissing the battered cheeks of her doll. 10 years later, I saw her again. I saw her in a brilliant ballroom. She was a lovely bride of a rich merchant. I was delighted with her happiness, and I often sought her in those quiet evenings. Alas, no one thought of my clear eye or my sharp glances. My rose was also sending out wild shoots like the roses in the vicarage garden. There are tragedies in everyday life too. Tonight I saw the last act. There in the narrow street, on a bed, she lay at death's door. The wicked landlord, rough and cruel, her only protector, tore aside the coverlet. "Get up," he said. "Your face is a sight. Dress yourself up, paint your face, and get some money, or I will turn you into the street. Get up at once." "Death is in my heart," she said. "Oh, let me rest." But he forced her to get up, and painted her cheeks, and put a wreath of roses in her hair. Then he seated her by the window with a light close by, and left her. I gazed upon her as she sat motionless, with her hands in her lap. The window flew back, and one of the panes cracked, but she did not move. The curtain fluttered round her like a flame. She was dead. The dead woman at the open window preached a moral to me. My rose from the vicarage garden. Fourth evening. "I went to a German play last night," said the moon. "It was in a little town. A stable had been turned into a theater, that is to say, the stalls were left standing and furbished up to make boxes. All the woodwork was covered up with bright paper. A little iron chandelier hung from the low ceiling, and so that it might disappear into the roof, as in a big theater at the sound of the prompter's bell. An inverted tub was fixed above it. Ring-a-ting went the bell, and the little chandelier made a spring of about a foot, and then one knew that the play had begun. A young prince and his consort, who were traveling through the town, were present at the performance. The house was crammed. Only the place under the chandelier was left like a little crater. Not a creature sat there, for the grease dropped, drop, drop. I saw it all, for it was so warm that all the loopholes had been opened. The lads and lasses outside were peeping in, notwithstanding that the police inside kept threatening them with their sticks. The noble pair sat in a couple of old armchairs close to the orchestra. The burgomaster and his wife usually occupied these, but on this occasion they were obliged to sit on the wooden benches, just as if they had been ordinary citizens. "There, you see that there is rank above rank," was the quiet remark of the good wives, and this incident gave a special air of festivity to the entertainment. The chandelier gave its little hops. The crowd was rapped over the knuckles, and yes, the moon saw the whole entertainment. 5th Evening. "Yesterday," said the moon, "I looked down upon the life of Paris, and my eye penetrated to some of the apartments in the Louvre. An old grandmother, poorly clad, belonging to the lower classes, accompanied by one of the subordinate attendants, entered the great empty throne room. She wanted to see it. She must see it. It had cost her many small sacrifices and much persuasiveness before she had attained her wish. She folded her thin hands and looked about her as reverently as if she were in a church. 'It was here,' she said, 'here,' and she approached the throne with its rich embroidered velvet hangings. 'There,' she said, 'there,' and she fell upon her knees and kissed the purple carpet. I believe she wept. 'It was not this very velvet,' said the attendant, a smile playing around his mouth. 'But it was here,' said the woman. 'It looked the same.' 'The same,' he answered, 'yet not the same. The windows were smashed to atoms, the doors torn off, and there was blood upon the floors. But you still may say that my grandson died upon the throne of France.' 'Died,' repeated the old woman. I don't think anything more was said. They left the room soon after, and my light grew stronger upon the rich velvet on the throne of France. Who do you think the old woman was? I will tell you a story. It was evening on the most brilliant day of victory in the July Revolution, when every house was a fortress, every window an embrasure. The populace stormed the Tuileries. Even women and children fought among the combatants. They pressed through the apartments of the palace. A poor half-grown lad in rags fought bravely among the other insurgents. He fell fatally wounded by bayonet thrusts and sank to the ground in the throne room itself, and his bleeding form was laid upon the throne where his blood streamed over the imperial purple. What a picture that was! The noble room, the struggling groups, a torn banner upon the ground, the tricolor floating from the bayonets, and on the throne the poor dying boy with his pale transparent face and eyes turned toward heaven, while his limbs were already stiffening in death. His naked breast and torn clothing were half hidden by the purple velvet decked with the lilies of France. It had been prophesied at his cradle that he should die on the throne of France. The mother's heart had dreamt of a new Napoleon. My beams have kissed the wreath of immortelles on the lad's grave, and this night they kissed the forehead of the old grandmother while she dreamt and saw the picture you may sketch here, the poor boy upon the throne of France. 6th Evening. I have been in Uppsala, said the moon. I looked down upon the great plain covered with coarse grass and the barren fields. I looked at myself in the waters of the Firis River, while the steamers frightened the fishes in among the rushes. The clouds chased each other below me, and they threw their shadows onto Odin's, Thor's, and Freya's graves, as they were called. Names have been cut all over the mounds in the short turf. There is no monument here where travelers can have their names carved, nor rock walls where they may be painted, so the visitors have had the turf cut away, and their names stand out in the bare earth. There is a perfect network of these spread all over the mounds, a form of immortality which only lasts till the fresh grass grows. A man was standing there, a poet. He emptied the mead horn with its broad silver rim and whispered a name, telling the wind not to betray it. But I heard it and knew it. A count's coronet sparkles over it, and therefore he did not speak it aloud. I smiled. A poet's crown sparkles over him. Eleonora Diaz's nobility gains luster from Tasso's name. I knew, too, where this rose of beauty blooms. Having said this, the moon was hidden by a cloud. May no clouds come between the poet and his rose. 7th Evening. Along the shore stretches a great forest of oak and beech. Sweet and fragrant is its scent. It is visited every year by hundreds of nightingales. The sea is close by, the ever-changing sea, and the broad high road separates the two. One carriage after another rolls by. I do not follow them, my eye rather rests on one particular spot. It is a tumulus, or barrow. Brambles and wild sloes grow among its stones. Here is real poetry in nature. How do you think people in general interpret it? I will tell you what I heard only last night. First, 2 rich farmers drove by. "There are some fine trees," said one. "There are 10 loads of wood in each," answered the other. "This will be a hard winter, and last winter we got $14 a cord." And they were gone. "This is a bad bit of road," said the next man who drove along. "It's those cursed trees," answered his companion. "You don't get a current of air, you only have the breeze from the sea." And then they rolled by. Next, the diligence came along. The passengers were all asleep at the prettiest part of the road. The driver blew his horn. He only thought, "How well I am blowing it, and it sounds well here. I wonder what they think of it." And then the diligence, too, was gone. The next to pass were 2 lads on horseback. Here we have youth and champagne in the blood, I thought. And indeed they looked with a smile at the moss-grown hill and the dark thicket. "Shouldn't I like a walk here with the miller's Christine?" said one. And then they rushed on. The flowers scented the air, and every breeze was hushed. It looked as if the sea was a part of the heavens outspread over a deep valley. A carriage drove by in which were 6 travelers. 4 of them were asleep. The 5th was thinking of his new summer coat and whether it became him. The 6th leaned forward and asked the driver if there was anything remarkable about that heap of stones. "No," answered the man, "it's only a heap of stones, but those trees are remarkable." "Tell me about them." "Well, they are very remarkable, you see, sir. In winter, when the snow lies deep and every place looks alike, these trees are the landmark to me, and I know I must keep close to them so as not to drive into the sea. In that way, you see, they are remarkable." Then he drove on. Now as an artist came along and his eyes sparkled, he did not say a word, but he whistled and the nightingales sang, the one louder than the other. "Hold your tongues," he cried, and took out his notebook and began noting down the colors in the most methodical manner. Blue, lilac, dark brown. "It will make a splendid picture." He saw it as a mirror reflects a scene, and in the meantime he whistled a march by Rossini. The last to come by was a poor girl. She rested a moment by the barrow and put down her burden. She turned her pale, pretty face towards the wood, and her eyes shone when she looked upwards to the sky over the sea. She folded her hands, and I think she whispered a prayer. She did not herself understand the feelings which penetrated her, but I know that in years to come, this night will often recur to her with all the lovely scene around her. It will be much more beautiful and truer to nature in her memory than the painter's picture will be with his exact coloring noted down in a book. My beams followed her till the dawn kissed her forehead. 8th Evening. There were heavy clouds in the sky, and the moon did not appear at all. I was doubly lonely in my little room, looking up into the sky where the moon ought to have been. My thoughts wandered up to the kind friend who had told me stories every evening and shown me pictures. What had he not experienced? He had sailed over the angry waters of the flood and looked down upon the ark, as he now did upon me, bringing consolation to the new world which was to arise. When the children of Israel stood weeping by the waters of Babylon, he peeped sadly through the willows where their harps were hung. When Romeo climbed on the balcony and young love's kiss flew like a cherub's thought from earth to heaven, the round moon was hidden behind the dark cypresses in the transparent air. He saw the hero at St. Helena, where he stood on the rock, gazing out over the illimitable ocean, while great thoughts stirred his breast. Nay, what could not the moon tell us? The life of the world is a story to him. Tonight I do not see you, old friend, and I have no picture to draw in remembrance of your visit. But as I looked dreamily up at the clouds, there appeared one beam from the moon, but it was soon gone. The black cloud swept over it. Still, it was a greeting, a friendly evening greeting, to me from the moon. 9th Evening. The air was clear again. Several evenings had passed, while the moon was in its first quarter. Then I got a new idea for a sketch. Hear what the moon told me. I have followed the polar birds and the swimming whales to the great coast of Greenland. Gaunt ice-covered rocks and dark clouds overhung a valley where willows and bilberry bushes stood in thick bloom, and the scented lychnis diffused its fragrance. My light was dim, and my crescent pale as the leaf of the water lily which had been floating for weeks upon the water after being torn away from its stem. The corona of the northern lights burned with a fierce light. The rays spread out from its wide circle over the heavens like whirling columns of fire, playing in green and red light. The inhabitants were assembled for a dance and merrymaking, but they had no wonder to bestow on the glorious sight, so accustomed to it were they. Let the souls of the dead play at ball with the walrus's head as much as they like, they thought, according to their superstitions. Their attention was entirely centered on the dancing and singing. A Greenlander, without his fur coat, stood in the middle of the circle with a small drum in his hand, on which he played, and at the same time sang a song in praise of seal hunting. The chorus answered him with "Ay-ya, ay-ya, ay," and at the same time hopped round the circle in their white fur coats, looking like polar bears. They wagged their heads and rolled their eyes in the wildest way. Then they held a mock court of justice. The litigant stepped forward and the plaintiff rehearsed his opponent's faults, all in a bold and mocking manner. The rest, meanwhile, dancing to the music of the drum. The defendant replied in the same spirit, and the assemblage laughingly gave their judgment. Thunders resounded from the mountains when portions of the ice field slipped away, and great masses broke off shivering into dust. It was a typical Greenland summer night. 100 paces away, under a tent of skins, lay a sick man. Life was still coursing through his veins, yet he was to die. He knew it himself, and those standing round him knew it too. So much so that his wife was already sewing up the skin robe around him so as not to have to touch the dead man later. She asked him, "Will you be buried on the fells, in the hard snow, or would you rather be sunk in the sea?" "In the sea," he whispered, and nodded with a sad smile. "Yes, the sea is a cozy summer tent," said the woman. "Thousands of seals sport about in it, and the walrus will sleep at your feet. The chase is certain, and plenty of it." The children howled and tore away the tightened skin from the window, so that the dying man might be borne down to the sea. The swelling oceans which gave him food in life, and now in death a resting place. His headstone was the floating iceberg which changes from day to day. Seals slumber on the ice, and the albatross spreads its great wings above it. 10th Evening. "I knew an old maid," said the moon. "She used to wear a yellow satin pelisse in winter. It was always new, and she never varied the fashion of it. Every summer she used to wear the same straw hat, and, I believe, a bluish-gray dress. She only used to go and see one old friend who lived across the street, but for the last few years she did not go, for her friend was dead. My old friend bustled about in her loneliness by her window, which was full of beautiful flowers in summer, and in the winter she grew splendid mustard and cress on a piece of felt. For the last few months she had not appeared at the window, but I knew that she still lived, for I had not seen her take the great journey about which she and her friend talked so much. 'Yes,' she used to say, 'when my time comes to die, I shall travel much further than I have ever done in my whole life. Our family burial place is 20 miles from here, and I am to be taken there for my last sleep with the rest of my family.' Last night a van stopped at the door, and a coffin was carried out, so I knew that she was dead. They put straw around the coffin and drove off. In it slept the quiet old maid, who for the last few years had not been outside the house. The van rattled quickly out of the town, as if bent on a pleasure trip. They went faster still when they reached the high road. The driver looked over his shoulder every now and then. I believe he was half afraid of seeing the old lady sitting there on the top of the coffin in her yellow pelisse. Then he whipped up the horses mercilessly and held them in so tightly that they foamed at the mouth. A hare darted across the road, and they got beyond the man's control. The quiet old maid, who year in, year out, had moved so slowly in her daily round, now that she was dead, was being hurried at a headlong pace over stock and stone along the road. The coffin, which was wrapped in mats, slipped off the van and fell onto the road, while driver, horse, and van rushed away in their wild flight. A little lark flew up from the field and burst into its morning song, right over the coffin. It perched on it and pecked at the matting, as if to tear the shell asunder. Then it rose gaily, warbling into the air, and I drew back behind the rosy clouds of dawn. 11th Evening. "It was a bridal feast," said the moon. "Songs were sung, toasts were drunk, everything was gay and festive. The guests went away, it was past midnight. The mother kissed the bride and the bridegroom. Then I saw them alone, but the curtains were almost closely drawn. The comfortable room was lit up by a lamp. 'Thank goodness they are all gone,' said he, kissing her hand and her lips. She smiled and wept and leant her head upon his breast, trembling like the lotus flower upon the flowing waters. They talked together in tender, glowing words. 'Sleep sweetly,' he exclaimed, and she drew aside the window curtain. "How beautifully the moon is shining," she said. "See how still and clear it is." Then she put out the lamp, and the cozy room was dark, except for my beams, which shone as brightly as his eyes. O womanhood, kiss thou the poet's lyre when he sings of the mysteries of life. 12th Evening. "I will give you a picture of Pompeii," said the moon. "I was in the outskirts of the town, in the Street of Tombs, as it is called, where the beautiful monuments stand. It is the place where once joyous youths crowned with roses danced with their fair sisters of lace. Now the stillness of death reigns. German soldiers in the Neapolitan pay to keep guard and play at cards and dice. A crowd of strangers from the other side of the mountains came into the town with guides. They wanted to see the city risen from the grave under my full beams. I showed them the chariot tracks in the streets paved with slabs of lava. I showed them the names on the doors and the signboards still hanging. In the small courtyards, they saw the basins of the fountains decorated with shells, but no stream of water played, and no songs resounded from the richly painted chambers where the metal dogs guarded the doors. It was indeed a city of the dead, only Vesuvius thundered forth its everlasting hymn, the several verses of which are called by man a new eruption. We went to the temple of Venus, built of dazzling white marble, with its high altar in front of the broad steps, and the weeping willows shooting up among the pillars. The air was blue and transparent, and in the background stood Vesuvius, inky black, with its column of fire like the stem of a pine tree. In the darkness, the cloud of smoke looked like the crown of the tree, only it was blood red, illuminated by the internal flames. A songstress was among the company, a great and noted one. I have seen the homage paid to her in the various capitals of Europe. When they reached the tragic theater, they all sat down on the stone steps of the amphitheater. They filled up a little corner of it as in centuries gone by. The stage still stood with its walled side scenes, and two arches in the background through which one sees the same decoration as was seen then, nature herself, the hills between Amalfi and Sorrento. For a joke, the singer mounted the stage and sang, for the place inspired her. I thought of the wild Arab horse, when it neighs, tosses its mane, and tears away. Her song was so light and yet assured. I also thought of the suffering mother beneath the cross of Golgotha. It was so full of deep feeling and pain. Round about echoed, just as it had done 1,000 years ago, the sound of applause and delight. "Happy gifted creature!" they all cried. 3 minutes later, the stage was empty, and not a sound was to be heard. The company departed, but the ruins stood unchanged, as they will stand for centuries, and no one will know of the momentary burst of applause, the notes of the beautiful songstress and her smiles. They are past and gone. Even to me, they are but a vanished memory. End of part 1. Please go to the next clip for part 2,